Fatherland is an alternative history detective novel by English writer and journalist Robert Harris in 1992 and has a film adaptation which first aired in 1994. In this unfortunate timeline, the Allies fail at the invasion of Normandy in 1944. Germany counterattacks with Operation Sea Leon and conquers the British Isles. The Americans withdraw from the European theater and focus their resources on Japan. In 1945, the US nukes Japan as retribution for Pearl Harbor. Japan then surrenders to the US, ending the war in the Pacific. In Europe, the war still dragged on between Germany and the Soviet Union. One key detail is that the atrocities the Germans committed during the war are only contained as rumors. The official narrative by the Germans is that the European Jew population was relocated to East Europe, but the actual sinister truth is buried and kept secret. Moving to the 1960s, Germany is still at war with the Soviet Union. Mustache Man quickly needed to conclude a formal peace with the US so that Germany and the US could forge an alliance against Soviets to end the war and ensure Germany's stability. In the film, we follow the story of Xavier March, a German detective in Berlin, and Charlotte Maguire, an American journalist. Through investigation, they discover the deaths of high-ranking officials are linked to the Wannsee Conference. After more investigation, March and Maguire retrieve secret documents where the truth is revealed. The people who attended the Wannsee Conference planned the extermination of the European Jewish population. Horrified by this revelation, March and Maguire devise a plan to hand over the documents to the US president, who is currently visiting Berlin to talk terms with Mustache Man and also to flee to the US together. After Maguire hands over the documents to the president is flabbergasted by the truth and cancels the meeting between Mustache Man and flies back to the US. March during this time convinces his son to flee with him to the States, but his son snitches to the SS. March escapes but is severely injured due to a bullet wound. He then calls his son one last time in a phone booth and dies. In the epilogue of the movie, it is revealed that the truth about the Jews spread, which lead to massive revolts and the eventual collapse of the Reich. Turning Point. Fall of Liberty is a first-person shooter video game developed by Spark Unlimited and published by Codemasters in 2008. In this unfortunate reality, Winston Churchill dies from a taxi while visiting New York in 1931, 8 years before the start of World War II. Without his leadership, Germany is somehow able to conquer Britain by 1940 with Operation Sea Lion. Germany then launches Operation Barbarossa and conquers the Soviet Union with no problem. The Germans use the oil in the Caucasus to aid Japan in its Pacific conquest, which makes Japan not attack Pearl Harbor, but also makes the US oil embargo on Japan completely useless. The US during this time is still isolationist and doesn't intervene during Germany's and Japan's rampage. Fast forward to 1953, Japan and Germany launch a surprise invasion of the US on both of its coasts. In the game, you play as Dan Carson, a construction worker, who is caught up in the surprise attack. After meeting up with the Resistance, Dan Carson and the Resistance raid the White House to save a US general, who was captured by the Germans. After saving the general, Dan kills the new puppet president. After the successful attack, the Resistance discovers that the Germans plan to test their new atomic bomb by flying a Zeppelin from London over to New York and dropping it on the city. Dan Carson travels to London, boards the Zeppelin, and sacrifices himself by blowing up the atomic bomb before it reaches New York City. More specifically, the Machine Games reboot series, Wolfenstein. The New Order was the first game in this series and is an action-adventure and first-person shooter developed by Machine Games and released in 2014. The game was a major success, and now the franchise spans 4 mainline games. In this nightmarish reality, an evil genius German scientist named Wilhelm Strasse, also known as Deathshed, begins developing advanced tech for the German army in the late 1930s. With this advanced tech, the Germans are able to repel the Normandy landings by the Allies in 1944, with only 89 German deaths, whereas the Allies lose nearly 160,000 troops. The Germans are also able to take Stalingrad by the Soviets and begin bombing Moscow. Despite the odds, the Allies are still confident they can win the war with strategic planning. But unfortunately for them, Germany struck gold in 1946 when they found an ancient vault that contained ultra-advanced tech, even more advanced than what Deathshed was developing. The vault belonged to the WW2, an ancient religious society that made this advanced tech as part of their belief. Now that the Germans have it, Deathshed researches the advanced technology and reverse engineers it to make superweapons for the Germans. Safe to say that a bloodshed followed for the Allies. By the end of 1948, Germany had obliterated any opposition it had, and the US, the last remaining major Ally nation, surrendered after an atomic bomb was dropped on New York City. With this, Germany rules the world unchallenged. Any nation left is either annexed or turned into a puppet. In the games, we follow the story of B.J. Blazkowicz, a U.S. military soldier who wakes up from a 14-year coma after a failed Allied operation to kill Deathshed. After learning that the world is now ruled by the Germans, he is still determined to change the tide. Through his actions and the resistance he is with, Blazkowicz is able to destabilize German rule, and even kill his nemesis Deathshed once and for all. By the end of the new Colossus, the American resistance wins the war in North America and kicks out the Germans from the continent. If you've enjoyed this video so far, then don't forget to like and subscribe to support my channel and get notified about future videos. Anyways, where were we? SSGB is an alternative history novel by Len Deighton and was first published in 1978 and has a TV series which first aired in 2017. In this dark reality, the Germans launch a successful Operation Celian on Great Britain in 1940. To salvage anything possible, the Royal Navy escapes from the Isles, and the British gold and foreign reserves are shipped to Canada. In 1941, the King and Prime Minister Winston Churchill get captured by German forces and the British armed forces surrender, ending World War II. Churchill was tried by court-martial in Berlin and executed while the King was imprisoned in the Tower of London. The rest of the royal family escapes to different British colonies, and a British government in exile is formed in Washington, D.C., but struggles to gain diplomatic recognition. Germany is satisfied with its conquest in Europe and honors the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact by not attacking the Soviet Union. The Germans and Soviets are such good friends that the Germans give the Soviet Navy naval bases in Scotland, and Karl Marx's body is taken from Highgate Cemetery in London to the Soviet Union. Franklin D. Roosevelt is still the U.S. president, and the United States is still officially neutral, but the Roosevelt administration is seeking to acquire German atomic research from the fictional location of Bringle Sands Atomic Research Establishment. The series follows Detective Superintendent Douglas Archer, a British policeman forced to work under SS command, as he navigates the murky line between collaboration and rebellion. After the Bringle Sands Atomic Research Facility is destroyed in the last episode, the show ends in ambiguity, with Archer's and the Resistance's fate unclear. A Hearts of Iron 4 alternate history mod, made by a talented team of developers. In this alternate timeline, Herbert Hoover wins the 1932 U.S. election. The Great Depression is still affecting the country, but Hoover does nothing about it. Joseph P. Kennedy then wins the 1936 election and wants to revive the American economy, but is stonewalled by Congress and the Supreme Court, so he also can't do anything about it. America's industrial capacity is hindered due to this. In Europe, instead of Stalin becoming the leader of the USSR, Nikolai Bukharin succeeds Lenin. Bukharin continues with Lenin's economic plan, which is basically state capitalism. However, this plan backfires and ends in famine and nationwide revolts. As a result, the Soviet Union was able to start industrializing in the late 1930s. This was pretty bad for the Soviets because when the Germans knocked on the door with Operation Barbarossa, it only took 6 months for the Soviet Union to collapse into warlord states. The Italians are also competent in this timeline and conquer the Suez Canal and take Gibraltar with the help of German troops, trapping the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean. In the Pacific, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in 1941 and cripples the U.S. Pacific Fleet. With limited production capacity, the U.S. is slow to rebuild its navy. The U.S. faced defeat after defeat in the Pacific, and the only hope left was to defend Australia and New Zealand from the Japanese. In Europe, the situation was dire. With the Royal Navy trapped in the Mediterranean, Germany launches Operation Celian in 1943, just as the first U.S. troops were arriving into Britain. By 1945, Preparations were being made to evacuate all remaining Allied troops from the British Isles as German forces relentlessly battled for the island. Fortunately, in the Pacific, the US was able to defend Australia and New Zealand and began pushing back the Japanese. The US was also almost finished rebuilding their fleet in Pearl Harbor. However, Germany decided to third party, and on July 4, 1945, a German plane takes off on one of the Japanese carriers and drops an atomic bomb on Pearl Harbor, obliterating the rebuilt US fleet and shattering any hope of an Allied victory. After this, the US signs a conditional surrender with Japan and Germany. The United States was made to surrender the territory of Hawaii to Japan, along with almost all of its Pacific possessions. In addition, large ports and naval bases in Los Angeles and San Francisco were to be leased to Japan in perpetuity. In addition to massive reparations, the US was also forced to remove its oil embargo from both Germany and Japan. Fast forward to 1962 and Germany, the US and Japan are in a Cold War. You as the player can choose any country you want in this mod and create your own history with the different focus trees every country has. It is another Hearts of Iron 4 alternate history mod, made by a talented team of developers. In this twisted reality, the Germans were able to destroy the entire British expeditionary force in the Battle of Dunkirk in 1940. After the French fall and Vichy France is created and the devastating loss in Dunkirk, the British are forced to make peace with the Germans, ending World War II within only a year. In 1941, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa and invades the Soviet Union. In the Pacific, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and America declares war on Japan. By 1946, the brutal war between Germany and the Soviet Union ends, with the Soviet Union collapsing into smaller states. Japan also surrenders to the United States after being nuked 4 times and naval invaded. The US also occupies eastern Russia during the collapse of the Soviets and installs a pro-US democratic Russian government. Fast forward to 1952, where the player yet again can choose many of the different historical paths that the mod offers. The Afrika Reich is an alternate history action thriller novel written by Guy Saville in 2011 and also has a sequel, The Madagascar Plan, which was published in 2015 by the same guy. In this alternate timeline, the Germans wipe out the entire British expeditionary force in the Battle of Dunkirk in 1940. Because of this devastating loss, the United Kingdom is forced to sign a peace treaty with Germany. Germany then carves up the African continent into British and German colonies, and the Germans extend their racial genocide to Black Africans. The Germans also initiated the Madagascar Plan, deporting 5 million European Jews to Madagascar. The book takes place in 1952 and follows the story of British mercenary Burton Cole, who is tasked with the assassination of Walter Hochberg, the German Governor-General of the Congo. After assassinating the general, Burton tries to flee the continent while being pursued by German forces. He becomes entangled in a deadly game of revenge, survival, and resistance against the German Empire in Africa. The book ends with Burton escaping Africa, but realizes his mission was intended to fail from the very start and plans to uncover the reason. The Man in the High Castle is an alternative history novel by Philip K. Dick, first published in 1962 and also has a TV series adaptation, which first premiered in 2015. In this alternate world, Giuseppe Zangara assassinates Franklin D. Roosevelt. Without Franklin D. Roosevelt and his New Deal, the American economy is left crippled by the Great Depression. As a result, the U.S. adopts isolationist policies to stay out of foreign affairs. Without American intervention, Germany is able to defeat the UK and the Soviet Union by 1945. In the Pacific, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in April of 1941 annihilated the entire naval fleet of the U.S. in the Pacific. Still paralyzed from the Great Depression, the U.S. is too weak to respond to the attack. By the end of 1945, Germany dropped an atomic bomb on Washington, D.C., wiping out the majority of the U.S. military command. Then, a joint invasion from Germany and Japan on both coasts forced the U.S. to surrender. Germany and Japan then divide the world and establish buffer zones between the two superpowers. Before I discuss the story, I want to mention that the novel and the show are very different. So for simplicity reasons, I will be going with the show, as it has more info on it, and also is a lot more wacky than the novel. The show follows many characters. One of them is Juliana Crane. Juliana's sister Trudy visits her one day and is given a tape that is from the man in the high castle. These tapes are anomalous, as they show alternate worlds like how the Allies actually won the war, or where San Francisco is nuked. On the world stage, John Smith is one of the top German officials in America. He himself was a former US military officer, but joined the German army when America surrendered. In good old Germany, Mustache Man is growing old, and his successors are planning a war against Japan. There was already a coup against him, but it ultimately fails. It doesn't really matter though, as Mustache Man shortly dies after. In wake of his death, Martin Haussmann becomes the acting chancellor of Germany and blames the death of Mustache Man on the Japanese and plans to nuke Japan, but he is also stopped by John Smith after it is revealed that he actually poisoned the Mustache Man himself. I'm gonna have to skip to the finale now because this segment would be too long otherwise. The finale culminates around a multiverse portal machine that the Germans have created and plan to use it to conquer other worlds. John Smith is now the leader of German America, but has become too brainwashed by the German ideology to be a good guy. When on a train to the multiverse portal facility, the resistance blows up the tracks, but John Smith survives the ambush. He is confronted by Juliana one last time and realizes he's the bad guy and ends himself. The resistance then storms the facility and take control of the machine, but the machine activates itself and random people start walking through it. Oh, and I forgot to mention that people can travel between dimensions by just meditating.